Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. Since the historic peace agreement was signed between Israel and Egypt on the 26th of March 1979, after intense negotiations brokered by the United States, the situation between the two countries has been relatively stable, yet challenging. With me to discuss the current relations between Israel and Egypt are Mr. Gilad Sher, a senior research fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies. Welcome. I'd like also to welcome our TV7 analyst, Mr. Amir Oren, and Ambassador Mazel, a senior researcher at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Welcome. Mr. Amir, give us a little bit of an understanding. Where do those relations stand today?
Next year, we will mark the 40th anniversary of the historic visit of Anwar Sadat to Jerusalem, which followed some clandestine contacts, but launched the overt peace moves. And even though Sadat insisted that this was not going to be a separate peace, it took a long time, some 15 years between this visit and the Oslo process and the peace with Jordan. Now, on the one hand, you may say that not all of the expectations were met regarding the Israeli-Egyptian peace. On the other hand, it held. And in the turbulent Middle East, for 4 decades, to have such a relationship unbroken is an achievement in itself. What is happening now? One should look at basically 3 factors. One is what is happening inside Egypt. Is the regime stable enough? Can it take part in other adventures or processes? The other is what is going to happen with the new American administration, because Egypt is in a miserable economic condition, which obviously Ambassador Mazel can go into. It needs some Israeli help on Capitol Hill and in Washington in general. We will see whether the Trump administration is going to be open to it. And the other thing is whether there is an Israeli-Palestinian peace process to which Egypt can contribute.
Well, we'll try and touch base on all those topics. Mr. Sher, how do you perceive today's relations between the two countries?
I think they are pretty good. And all in all, we have a lot of common concerns and common interests that could provide a future basis for discussion and dialogue, not only with Egypt, but with Egypt leading kind of a Sunni moderate axis. Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, probably the Gulf states, in terms of countering trends in the Middle East, in the larger Middle East, that are of concern to all the parties that I've mentioned. And I believe that they could be instrumental also in helping to move ahead with the Israeli-Palestinian resolution of the conflict, at least with a gradual process that Egypt could help with as much as they did during the Oslo process that Amir mentioned. They were in the very outset of the Oslo process. They were quite instrumental in putting together kind of a platform for the two parties to be able to communicate with one another.
Ambassador Mazel, your perception of the situation?
Yeah, well, I prefer to describe the peace with Egypt as a unfinished peace. It's peace, absolutely no war for 40 years almost. It's something wonderful in the Middle East, as our friend said. But I think the target was to go beyond peace, to establish good normalization, good relation, good cooperation between the two peoples on economic level, sport level, cultural level, scientific level. It has not succeeded. The Egyptians from the outset refused. They boycotted Israel, and it became a kind of a cool peace, still peace, okay. So that's the problem. And so far, we have not managed to cross that phase to something really warmer that will change the atmosphere in the Middle East. That's the problem. Now, I still have a lot of hopes on Sisi, on President Sisi. He's a good man. He's a rational man. He's doing for Egypt now really miracles. He's not understood, but he's doing the best one can do for Egypt on the economic level. And it is taking many, many risks by taking $12 billion loan from the IMF, you know, and floating the lira, the Egyptian pound, you see, and implementing VAT, value-added taxes. Prices are up, so it's a really danger, but he's doing the best. Now, but so far, he has not dared to tell his people, listen, my fellows, we have peace in Israel, 40 years of peace. They are good people. They are very developed on the scientific, economic. Let's work with them. They can help. They cannot save us, but they can really help us, you see? So there is a problem because the old elites of Islamic establishment, Nasserist, Pan-Arabism, nationalists, they're still there. They're still strong, and they hate Israel. Not the people. The people, you know, being incited against Israel. I met an ambassador, thousands of people. They love Israel. They accept Israel, no problem, but they're being incited. How to change it? How to change the Arab world? This is the problem also of Egypt now, because for Egypt and for us, certainly, it's very important. So I look forward to see what will happen in the coming months or years because of a new administration in America. It might help. But there is a problem between us and the Arabs that still weighs on Egypt, and they don't dare to make the next step to do something really wonderful.
Well, Mr. Oren, we heard the variables that are at play right now, and what I kind of understand from each and every one of the respective answers that we've received here is that some 39 years ago, 2 weeks ago, from 2 weeks ago, you mentioned Anwar Sadat's historic visit, where optimism was on an all-time high with the first visit by a major Arab player to the Jewish state, and yet this optimism and this eagerness to be able to establish real relations, the same relations that Israel has with European states, with the United States, it kind of turned to something meager, something not really established. How do you explain this from the depth of Egyptian society on the one hand and the failure on the other hand by the leadership in Egypt and Israel to establish such a reality?
Well, there is a paradox here. As long as Egypt led the Arab world in hostility, in militancy, and as a military power, it was the key to everything which was happening between Israel and the Arab world. But as soon as it made its peace with Israel and other powers emerged, its importance was lowered. Now, you mentioned the Sadat visit, and Sadat saw the world in broad strokes. He didn't mind the minute details the way Menachem Begin did. And Sadat believed that the very act of his coming to Jerusalem will break the ice. Now, on the Israeli-Egyptian front, it did. And the Israeli electorate responded with enthusiasm. But then, a few weeks after the Sadat visit, Menachem Begin went to Washington, went to see President Carter, and started haggling about the details of the autonomy plan for the Palestinians, because Sadat insisted that this is not a separate piece. He is not acting only on behalf of Egypt. He is also trying to help the Palestinians and thereby solve the Arab-Israeli conflict, not the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but the Arab-Israeli conflict. And for the last almost 40 years, especially under Mubarak, who took over in late 1981, and a series of Israeli leaders, the relationship stalled because there was no breakthrough. There were several moves, such as the Oslo process, such as the peace with Jordan, but this was not enough to regenerate the enthusiasm which accompanied the Sadat visit. And it takes bold leadership. Perhaps, as Tzvi Mazel said, Sisi is such a person, and perhaps Israel, under someone, could approach him and then reignite the process.
Mr. Sher, would you agree with that?
Well, I agree with both the statements of Sisi being the right person, and that time has come for us to reignite the process. Yes, I definitely think so. And I believe that the importance of Egypt is getting positive traction right now, much more than it has been throughout the years of the Muslim Brotherhood and the last years of President Mubarak before ousted. So yes, there is an opportunity here for a kind of a regional outlook that would provide a stabler and more coherent kind of relationship between Israel and Egypt. And I believe that the way to provide for an even more positive traction is throughout economy and agriculture and a lot of investments that would help Egypt raise out of its very problematic situation right now. You know, feeding those 80 million every day.
93 million.
93
Already,
no.
okay. That's quite difficult, and Israel could help.
Mr. Ambassador Mazel.
Yeah, well, we have between us and Egypt the Palestinian problem. Yes.
Is it truly linked?
Yeah,
It is. Sure.
It is linked.
Sure.
It is linked because the Egyptian, the Arab Egyptian, the side of the Arabic side of Egypt wants it. They have been under Islam occupied by Arabs, Muslim Arabs, 1400 years, and they became Arabs. Not all of them. You know, during Sadat, they went to the Egyptian side. They wanted to forget a little bit the Arab side. That's a problem. But listen, since now, after 39 years of peace, 49 years of peace, Egypt, with 93 million people, with so many economic problems, must take a decision whether to let the Palestinian problem stop any relation between us, good relation, progress, cooperation, science, whatever, or to remain as it was. I think that it is about time. I'm not the president of Egypt, but I believe when I look what's going on, Egypt is a very important Arab country, the most important, with borders of 6,000 years, the same borders more or less. Yeah? Cannot depend on the Palestinian problem. Palestinian problem between other Palestinians is very complicated, difficult. It will not be solved in the coming days or the coming months. And Egypt needs to change completely its policy. Now, President Sisi, a few months after he was sworn in as a president, he went to Al-Azhar, and he told them, those people with the beautiful hats, he told them, listen, the narrative of Islam, there is an extremist narrative in Islam. We have to change it because the world will not never accept it. The world will never be Islamic. The world will not accept to be Islamized by us. You, people of Al-Azhar, must change it. Maybe he could do the same thing regarding the relations of Israel, to take an initiative like Sadat. Egypt is too big to be dependent on the Palestinian problem. The only way to look at it now, I would like to add something and refer to what you said about the Sunni bloc.
Please.
This is very important because this is, in fact, a kind of a hope. A good Sunni bloc who goes together, works together in front of Daesh, in front of Iran. Okay, it was good, but as long as America was behind it. But America is not anymore behind it. Obama completely let it down. Now it's broken. The signing of the nuclear agreement with Iran put Saudi Arabia aside, and the fact that Obama supports the Muslim Brothers took Sisi to Russia. Russia's now financing a nuclear plant. They're selling him planes, helicopters, whatever. Now that wonderful Sunni bloc, which is very important for us and for the Middle East, is completely broken. Let us see what's going to happen with the new administration, with Trump. But so you see, we have many problems to be solved, and I think the main person is Sisi. Is Sisi.
Well, we'll come back to that point. I would like to touch base on the actual agreement between Israel and Egypt, one of which actually identified the Sinai Peninsula as a limited military zone, demilitarized to a certain extent. This has been broken in recent years due to various challenges against various Islamist organizations, including Ansar Beit al-Maqdis, which later pledged allegiance to the Islamic State and became Wilayat Sina. This organization has been challenging Egypt on various fronts. So when the Egyptians moved tanks and aircrafts into the Sinai Peninsula, Israel did not respond, even though it was a clear violation of the peace agreement between the two states. Now, however, Egypt has acquired the S-300 surface-to-air missiles from Russia, an advanced anti-aircraft system, which it stationed also within certain areas of the Sinai Peninsula, even though Wilayat Sina does not have aircrafts or any weaponry from the air. Thus, why would they move those things there? And obviously, it's the answer that Israel is the only one who would be threatened by such a move. Give us a little bit of an understanding. How does this work?
It is not really a threat. In years past, whenever Saudi Arabia bought US-made planes like the F-15 and put them in Tabuk, the airbase not far from the Red Sea, Israel considered it a threat. And obviously, as you say, if you have Israeli Air Force planes, including as of a week or so from now, the F-35 based in the Negev, of course, it could be threatened by the S-300, even though it may show that this Soviet-made or Russian-made system is not operative against the best American-made weapons. But be it as it may, Egypt, as distinct from the other Arab states, not only took part in the war of 1948-49, because 7 Arab countries invaded Israel or wanted to take part and help the Palestinians, but Egypt, along with Jordan, ended the war with a piece of territory, with the Gaza Strip under its control. It only had military administration there. It never annexed Gaza, never gave the Palestinians Egyptian nationality. But between the Suez Canal and Gaza, there is the Sinai Peninsula, which was always a backward part of Egypt, a desert. Nobody really cared about the Bedouins living there in El Arish or other places. But the link with Gaza made it important. And as long as Israel was there, from 1967 to 1982, there was no problem. Once Israel left, and there was this connection between Sinai or the Rafah salient and Gaza, and there are people who live on either side of the fence in the Palestinian Rafah and in the Egyptian Rafah, you saw a radicalization of the residents of Sinai, which led to what you mentioned, the Daesh branch, no matter what you call it. So now it is a threat both to Egypt and to Israel, and therefore it is a common enemy. And security cooperation between Israel and Egypt has never been better. And Israel allows Egypt to put in whatever sort of troops, planes, helicopters, armor, in order to quell this problem, because Israel is going to be next. If Egypt loses the fight to Daesh, the Israeli south, the Negev, will be constantly threatened. It is even more important than the Hamas threat in Gaza, and we can later speak about the Egyptian-Israeli-Hamas connection.
Mr. Sher, do you think that the violations of the treaty on the Egyptian part were coordinated with Israel? And if so, to what extent will Israel allow some violations to be done on the side of the Egyptians?
Well, there's always two schools about that. The first one is a very rigid one, legal one that says no matter what, we do not show any kind of flexibility despite the circumstances. And the other school is more flexible, and it looks at the common interest for showing more flexibility in terms of allowing this common interest to overrule the legal part of the agreement. And I think that to answer directly your question, yes, most of the infringements were pre-coordinated with Israel. So we do see the way that the cooperation here serves both actors considerably in doing this work that Amir referred to.
Ambassador Mazel, also another infringement or violation of the peace agreement was the transfer of the Tiran and Sanapir from Egypt to Saudi Arabia, one of which Israel was very silent, even though it was a significant part of the peace agreement between the two countries, which allowed maritime freedom for the Israeli side in the southern Red Sea. Give us a little bit of an understanding. How far of a challenge is this for Israel to be part of a region in which it does not have peace with all countries, but has to deal with countries in or under the table or in other constellations of diplomacy?
Yeah, those two islands are quite important to Israel because they block the entrance to Eilat, to our southern issue toward Asia, Africa. And when we signed the agreement, the peace agreement with Egypt, part of demilitarization concerned those two islands, Tiran and Sanapir. So at a certain time, Sisi decided to give it to Saudi Arabia, maybe because he got from them $20 billion, and maybe he wanted to give them something really, something, good or whatever, positive. For us, it's a problem. It's a problem because as long as it was with Egypt, we have peace. If it goes to Saudi Arabia, it's a state of war between us, you see? So when it was signed, the agreement between Saudi Arabia and Egypt a few months ago, we put it under the carpet, and our press told us, and probably it's true, that the Egyptian had told us about this. And we said, okay, because what could we have done if they decide to do it? We don't like it. So now, what happened that I wrote a long article about it, and I checked it. I think that those two islands belong to Egypt, absolutely. Mm-hmm. From very old history. I looked at the maps. I saw text in all that encyclopedias. You don't say anymore encyclopedia. You see the Wikipedia. Wikipedia. So what happened that according to the constitution, to the new constitution, voted and accepted by Sisi, you cannot give a piece of land of Egypt to other country. It's written. Mm-hmm. And then for Egypt to give a piece of land, not connected to the constitution, but the way of thinking. Mm-hmm. Land is holy, is sacred for Egyptians, for all of us. But in Egypt, really, it's something like God or whatever. So immediately, some people went to the court and asked to stop the agreement, and it was stopped. It was stopped. So I think Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is now a little bit embarrassed towards Saudi. But since in the last few weeks there are some problems between two countries, because as I said before, Sisi went to Russia, and Saudi Arabia has a problem in Syria, so they don't work anymore. They work less together. They don't constitute anymore the Sunni bloc. So we are now in a situation of a limbo situation. We have to see what's going to happen. It's very, very complicated, and you are right, it depends not most of it maybe, on the next president of the United States, and we'll see what's coming on the 20th of January.
Mr. Oren.
People make too much of this issue. We used, or at least the Israeli government and the Israeli general staff, before the Yom Kippur War, used to say that one has to sit on the Suez Canal in order to defend Israeli control over the Sinai. And Gilad Sher, as an armor officer, was there, fought valiantly in the war. And it turned out to have been a very misguided concept. Now, the freedom of movement in the Gulf of Eilat, in the Red Sea, is not being kept in Tiran and Sanafir. It is in Bab el-Mandeb, way south. The whole area which the Iranians challenge, which even the Chinese are now sailing into. And if the Saudis, for some reason, go crazy and decide to challenge Israel, they don't...
Not now, but maybe later.
Yes, maybe later. They don't have to do it. The trend is opposite. The Saudis have long ago gave the Jordanians a lot of land near Aqaba, which is adjacent to Eilat, because earlier, if you lived in Eilat in the 1960s, you saw Saudi Arabia from your window. Saudi Arabia did not border Israel, but it was only a few kilometers from Israel. Now it is more distant. So this is not a real issue. The question is Egypt going to be or to remain part of an alliance along with Israel, perhaps along with what was called the Arab Quartet, with Saudi Arabia and Jordan, and UAE. We will see.
Mr. Sher, one
Just to
sentence on
recap
this.
very briefly on the delinkage of the Egyptian and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I don't believe that this delinkage is possible. I think that whoever speaks about going forward on the platform of the Arab Peace Initiative, for instance, is incorrect, because if there will not be advancement and progress on the Israeli-Palestinian front, the bilateral front, and this resolution of conflict, then nothing regional will happen.
We actually have less than a minute to complete the program. So, Mr. Oren, I'll give you the opportunity to give us one sentence on the matter. I'll give each and every one of you as well. Please.
The fact that General Sisi, now President Sisi, is in power is a net plus for Israel, of course. But there is one small minus, and that is that the Muslim Brotherhood under Morsi, his predecessor, had a very good relationship with Hamas. So the problems that Israel had with Hamas during the Morsi regime were solved much earlier. Right now, Sisi cannot serve as a mediator between Israel and Hamas.
Mr. Sher?
I'd recommend secret, secluded dialogues rather than fanfares and photo ops.
Mr. Ambassador Mazel?
I just mentioned the economic problem. You see, we have the quiz. It's very important. I don't have the time to explain. It's very important. It's a cooperation. It's an extension of free trade zone between Israel and the United States, and it allows Egypt to export textile for $1 billion to the United States without customs paying fee. This is going to continue. It's very, very important. And then I really hope that we'll be able to sell gas to Egypt. Very, very important.
Well,
if those two things continue, there will be a good basis.
Time. Ambassador Mazel, thank you so very much, Mr. Sher, Mr. Oren, and Ambassador Mazel. It's been a pleasure. I'd like to thank our viewers, and we will see you next week. TV7 Israel's mission is to give you, our viewers, truthful information, which in effect will give you a chance to really understand what is happening in Israel and its region. If you're blessed by our programs and believe our mission to be important, we urge you to support us and become a voice for Israel. You can support us by going to our website at tv7israelnews.com. This program was made possible through your donations.